Today we're getting under the hood of Dr. Rina Sanghavi, an M.D., an M.B.A., and an F.A.A.P, a mother, daughter, sister, women's advocate, and a professor of pediatrics at U.T Southwestern Medical Center, Children's Health, Children's Medical Center of Dallas, where she is the director of pediatric neurogastroenterology. She has helped establish the Aerodigestive Clinic, the Chronic Abdominal Pain Program, Motility and Biofeedback Program, as well as the Center for Anorectal Malformations and Pelvic Disorders at her institution. She holds several administrative and leadership positions, including President of the Medical Dental Staff and Director of the Office of Faculty Engagement and Chair of the Pediatric Business Strategy Group. She is also the outgoing chair of the Professional Development Committee and the inaugural chair of the Women in Medicine Committee for NASPGHAN, NASPGHAN. She is an advocate for women leaders in medicine, equity, and empathic leadership. She is passionate about marrying the business aspect of a medical practice with efficiency and promoting wellness within clinicians, especially in an academic environment. She has published on motility as well as equity in medicine. She has been invited for lectures and talks on neurogastroenterology, nutrition, and leadership nationally and internationally. And in addition, she has also been recognized with several awards, including the Clinical Excellence Award at UT Southwestern and the Breaking the Glass Ceiling Award across GI societies. Wow. Welcome, Rina.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It's an honor.
Well, I am just so excited. We're coming to a close of season 3, Women Making the World Healthier, and I couldn't be more delighted than to be getting under the hood with you. And so if it's okay, I would love to get going.
Sure.
Wonderful. So I've been asking every woman this question, and it's really interesting as we go on the journeys of each of your lives, what that inflection point was. Like when did the interest in medicine and going into healthcare, when did that begin for you?
I think it really was there somewhere deep inside, but I want to say 10th grade. I clearly remember the moment when it happened. So I did my high school in India. And I always thought I wanted to be a war journalist. So go figure, very far away from medicine. And very briefly, after I read, some very inspirational books, I toyed with the idea of being an architect. But after 10th grade is really where you have to decide whether you want to do kind of a science-based field like medicine or something different. I remember very clearly thinking, I want to make a difference in the world, and I want to make a difference in the lives of people around me. And that's when I decided to go into medicine, and I guess I haven't looked back since then.
Well, I love that. And I think it's so interesting that such a young age to be so deeply impacted and to make a decision. I think that's a lot of pressure on kids, if you will. So take us on that journey. So you make the decision to go in, you want to help serve people. What did that experience, what was it like?
So it was actually great. And mind you, I was 15 when I was in 10th grade. So that's when I made that decision. And then, you go through the equivalent of pre-med in India. And then I went through med school, and I was the very first one on both sides of my family, mother side and father side, to not just go through advanced degrees, but also to be in medicine. So there was a little bit riding on me, so to say. But I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of med school. It was fascinating to learn about the human body and to learn that so many thousands of years later, we're still discovering new things about the human body. That's what excited me. It was a little bit like being a detective and still, kind of knowing that you might get to the end, but there's still some clues that will always be, always be missing, so to say. And then, just that I remember my very first time when I had my first contact with patients, and the thankfulness, the gratitude, and the immense hope that you see in their eyes is really something that lit a fire somewhere deep inside me, Elizabeth. And I think that was what's kept me going all these years. And then I decided to, on a a little bit of a whim, so to say, I decided to pursue further education in the US. So I was the first woman to have left the country on both sides of the family, to have left the country to study abroad, and especially done it while not being married, which was a big thing in India at that time. So that journey led me to the US, and it was supposed to be a short-term deal. I was supposed to just specialize in pediatrics and maybe pediatric GI and go back home. And I met the love of my life, and I'm here so many years later.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that. I'm just like deeply moved by that. But I love how that curiosity and that interest in doing good and the experiences, the way it touched you to keep you going and to keep you inspired. I'm kind of curious. So you finished med school in India and then came over to sort of do your internship or
No, I came over to do pediatrics. So I did pediatrics at SUNY downstate in Brooklyn, New
yeah,
York.
yeah.
Loved it, loved every minute of it. And such a hands-on, transformative experience. And then I wanted to do oncology. So I always knew I loved kids. I always knew I wanted to make a difference in the lives of kids. And so pediatrics was my calling. And there was a lot of chatter around me about, hey, you won't make a whole lot of money, but I was never in this for the money. And so I wanted to do pediatric hemonc, but it's just such I think it needs a special personality to deal with those sick children and to continually kind of deal with them. And so I realized quickly that was not for me. And then I liked working with my hands and procedures. So pediatric GI was next. And so I came to UT Southwestern to do my fellowship in pediatric GI. Again, it was meant to be a 3-year deal. I was going to go back to New York where my husband had some family there, but love Texas, love the people. It's the people that have made me stay every single time. And I've been here now in Texas for over 20 years and couldn't be happier.
Wow, wow. So I want to go back a little. That's interesting. So, and that is heavy, the idea of being a pediatric oncologist, in hemonc. So I hear you with that. What is your experience like? So you ended up going into pediatric gastroenterology. What is that like as both a physician? And I just see you as so much more than that, the way you connect. You clearly are in it for more than just treating patients for care. So what is that experience like?
That experience is something magical. And don't get me wrong, there are days of frustration and there are days of sadness, but a lot of it is just, I think, that sparkle you see in the kid's eye when they're feeling better, the sparkle that they lose when they're not feeling well. And I think I live for those days when you can see that sparkle back in their eyes, the little mischief back in their eyes. And so it's been very rewarding for me. We deal a lot with children, for example, who cannot eat for a variety of reasons. And so we'll have nutritional therapy for them. And, to me, some of the deepest moments in my life are when, a child is done with their therapy or doesn't need a tube in their stomach anymore. And you take it out and they're like, look, Dr. Sanghavi, I'm eating again. I was recently in California and I happened to run into a patient who I had not remembered, but who I had treated about 20 years ago. So I must have been a very young attending then, who still remembered me and said, I remembered something that you said. So it's moments like that. Another great moment that I will always think influenced my career is I walked into my local Starbucks and the manager, so I like gardening, Elizabeth. And so I was looking for, the coffee grounds, which are supposed to be really good for
Yes.
your
Mhm.
garden. So I was looking for the manager, and the manager was like, do you remember me, Dr. Sanghavi? And I was like, no, I don't. And he was like, I was a teenager and I was admitted to your hospital. And, I had kind of given up all hope. He had a GI condition. And you had told me no matter what happens, you've got to finish college. There's one chance in life you get to do it, and you've got to do it. And I did it. And I worked my way up, and I'm here now, a manager at Starbucks. So it's moments like those that you made a difference in the life of someone that really, I think, have been so beautiful in my career.
I think that's amazing. I love the encounters, those special, to your point, the magic and that. But it's interesting, as I introduced you, you've done so much. So I love the fact that you have this one-on-one connection with your patients, but you've done all these things in terms of, being a director, establishing these different programs. Why don't you share a little bit about what you've done over the years on top of, being a practicing clinician, what you're doing to set up all these initiatives within your organization.
Yeah, and so when I came to Dallas for fellowship, I knew that there was a need for, and I was very drawn to motility procedures, which is how the gut works and the nerves and muscles and the physics of the gut working. And there wasn't actually specialized training at that point in time. There is now. And so I actually sought out my own specialized training. And so I spent a few months at Boston Children's Hospital, at Cincinnati Children's, and at Columbus Children's. And I actually learned the skill of doing pediatric motility and it's called neurogastroenterology, and brought it back to Dallas. I should point out, Elizabeth, you like this or not. I did this while my son was about 3 months old. So I was nursing him, but he was here in Dallas. I would fly out on a Sunday night and then fly back on a Friday night. And, I would pump and bring all of that stuff back. And those were the early days. And so if you didn't have the baby with you, I actually had to get dry ice and pay customs duty for the dry ice. So fun times. But I came back to Dallas, established the program on motility and sophisticated motility testing for pediatrics. And then I realized pretty quickly, again, being a young mother, that sometimes parents are shuttled from specialty to specialty and not really given an answer. It's usually like, oh, your child's coughing. Why don't you go see the lung doctor? The lung doctor will be like, it's not us. Why don't you go see the GI doctor? And so I thought, how fun would it be to have all three doctors in one room, one place, hashing out the problem right there. And so that's when I set up this was way back when in 2007, I set up the Aerodigestive program. Very new concept at that time. They had started it in a few places, but very new in Texas overall. And that's essentially where the lung doctors, the GI doctors, and the ENT doctors are all in one place. And then that led to all of these different multidisciplinary programs.
Well, I was just going to say, I was just thinking that you were ahead of your time when you think about, the multidisciplinary teams. And I would imagine just by doing that, you save, of course, you save time for the patient from a proper diagnosis. And then the end goal is you also reduce healthcare costs. Like, so you have impact on both a macro and a micro level, which is just amazing. So
Yeah,
kudos.
and I think most importantly, we impacted the child, right? And I think,
Exactly.
right? And I think to me, I have learned so much in the process. Oh, yeah, that's true. That could be a possibility. And I've also have found myself held accountable in the process, which is this is not something I can say it's not my problem because it is my problem. So that's how we started the chronic abdominal pain program as well, because that's an incredibly frustrating condition. A lot of these children are not even usually believed when they have severe pain, but it's like having a migraine. You can have the worst pain in your life if you've ever had a migraine, and most of the tests are going to be normal. And so most people will then say, well, that's not a true migraine or not a true headache. And very similarly, we have chronic abdominal pain. And so that program really helped us establish that we know that these children are in pain, but we're moving forward with how do we get them their childhood back? How do we get them their lives back? How do we get that quality of life back? And then again, the anorectal malformations program was similar. We have a lot of children born with malformations who need incredibly coordinated care, which now, thanks to the advances in medicine, we have available. And so again, it's that's what drives me, how do I make life better for children?
That is I just like that, just the way you said that. How do I make life better for children? I'm kind of curious because when you look at you're a clinician, you're a leader, you put these initiatives together. You sit in so many different intersections, if you will, of caring for children. What would you say your favorite part of it is?
I think my favorite part of it is making a difference in the lives of the people who are in the hospital. And by that, I mean the people who choose to seek care at the hospital, the patients and their families, and the people who choose to seek their careers at the hospital, the people who work at the hospital. I think that's my favorite part, the people aspect. And every single person in that hospital is incredibly driven for one thing, and whether they verbalize it or consciously know it or not, but every single person is driven by, we're going to make kids better. And that's such a powerful motto. And there is, to me, this level of fairness that is in there. And that's a core value of mine, justice, fairness. And so when it comes to being unwell, it's really not in our hands. But what is in our hands is, how do we make every child feel better? How can we do the best to help their journey towards health? And that's what I see at the hospital where I work at. Incredible place, day to day, across all specialties, across, from environmental services to the physicians, to the people who work at the cafeteria, to the people who are at, the information desk. Everybody's there because they want to make life better for children.
Well, and I would imagine just being in a children-centric space just offers a very different perspective because you're getting them, you're able to touch their lives at such a young age. Like I would imagine to have gone into Starbucks and have that gentleman say, "Don't you remember me?" I can't even imagine that. That must have been, such a connective moment. And so I'm kind of curious, like, you do so much. You're amazing. You're also a professor. What's it like to teach the next gen? What are you seeing? What are you hoping to accomplish in that?
It is fascinating, and you can actually see the evolution of the human mindset over the years. What I love about the next generation is that they have a very strong sense of who they are. They have a very strong sense of what my kids would cringe if I said this, but YOLO, which is you only live once. And they have a very clear idea of, how are we going to balance priorities? Yes, I want to do medicine, and yes, I want to help people feel better. And I have one life to live, so I also want to enjoy it to the fullest. And I think, honestly, my generation and the generation before me, we didn't think of it that way. We were just, you know what, this is a career. I'm going to give it my all. And oh, by the way, I've also got to go home and cook dinner. For them, this is, the new generation now is just so much more, I think, fulfilled. And they know how they're going to be fulfilled, and they know their priorities. And they are incredibly smart, Elizabeth. The people coming out of colleges who are entering med school, I sometimes look at them and think about, my gosh, what is med school going to look like 20 years from now? Because they're already incredibly so smart. And I really think that the future of medicine is bright, which is why I fight so hard for equity for men and women within medicine, right? We've got more women entering medicine now for the last few years. The incoming medical class in the United States for the last few years has been slightly more women, 51, 52, 53% more women. And yet, when you look at a lot of things in medicine, there are women that are lacking, shockingly lacking, including in compensation equity. So, same work, not getting paid the same, including in leadership opportunities, and including in things that should not um, be subjective, which is publications, awards, recognition awards. And so, that's why I feel the sense that we owe it to the next generation coming in. We've got to fix this. We've just got to make it equal. I'm not saying the pendulum swings completely the other way, just make it equal, because this is what we owe the generation coming behind us.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you for sharing that. And I couldn't agree more. My stepmother is still a practicing physician at 80 years old. She's a nephrologist, and I have watched her career At one point, she was chief of nephrology, a professor. She was sending out for NIH grants, what have you. And she was never had equity from a pay perspective. So I think that we as women, regardless of where we are in our careers, what companies, what industries, we owe it to set that up and to role model that behavior and to help other women ensure that they're negotiating for themselves properly. So I think that's wonderful that you're thinking about it, that you're spearheading it, whatever you're doing to make that happen for female doctors is just awesome. You've also been, you do a lot of lecturing, so tell our audience what you speak about.
Yeah, and I think part of this comes with being in academic medicine. The more you publish, the more people know about your work. And so I've always enjoyed speaking, I think. Fun fact, when I was younger, I was always the MC or the narrator in all our school plays and school dramas. And so I feel like this has been a natural progression for me. And so, I do get invited fairly often to national conferences to talk on my subject area, which is neurogastroenterology, motility, sometimes on nutrition in children, and now increasingly more and more on equity within medicine and how do we move the needle forward for women in medicine, including our women patients, not just women physicians, but including our women patients. So that's been fun. It's not without its challenges, Elizabeth, because sometimes, when I go to these conferences 2, 3 days at a time, my kids are home, my husband's home. And so there is a little bit of that mom in me that feels the tug of I'm missing out on my kids, but I have to give a lot of props to my kids. They're now 18 and 16, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. Especially my daughter says, Mom, you need to do this. Just go. We're fine. We're grown up. We're fine. We've always been fine. We actually find that when you're gone and you come back, you're a lot happier. And we know that this is meaningful work to you. So this is important to you. It's important to us. So I enjoy that. And then, through these opportunities, you get to hear other people, you get to hear ideas that other people have. And that has been, I think, really incredible for me, Elizabeth, because I think that's how medicine moves forward. I think that's how any field moves forward is hearing other people's ideas with an open mind. I think that's honestly what being a professor of medicine is all about. How do you progress your career forward and keep an open mind? Know that your idea, your concept, your perception is not the only right one. How do you entertain other perceptions? Um, and they could be completely different than yours, and they're not necessarily right or wrong. They're just different. And ruminate on it, think about it. I think that's how humanity, to be honest, moves forward.
Well, I like that. There's so much to unpack in those two areas. First, I just have to applaud you. You're an outstanding role model for your daughter and for your son. And I think that as women, we don't realize that going out and working and demonstrating dedication and commitment and discipline, that continuous day after day, going home and supporting our families and being present. It is a balancing act for sure. I have adult children, and I spend a lot of time thinking, well, I don't live in regret. But what I will say to you is that we don't realize the power in the role modeling we're doing. To the second area of unpacking, which is really about, I mean, I think it's amazing who you are, what you've shared thus far, because you're right, it is about setting up the future generations, and it is about recognizing how and where the disparities are going in, and then thinking about, to your point about really learning and being open-minded in situations with ideas. I think what's interesting about that to me, Rina, is that it's like you have to leave your ego at the door. And physicians, generally, you're so smart, you're so educated, you're like encyclopedias of medicine. You have to recall things from 20 years ago. You see a situation. So, I mean, that's a lot, right? I mean, I mean, you don't seem egoless, but you seem quite humble for someone who's accomplished so much. So how has that been for you?
I think part of it is medicine humbles you. And you can read all these big fat textbooks, and a lot of times you're absolutely right what you alluded to, which is, everything's on Google now, everything's online and up to date now. But there is something about going through the rigors of medical school, because it's how do you make these connections for things that you learned about so many years ago. And I'm always amazed, sometimes with my brain, even as I'm getting older, because I will see two things that are seemingly completely unrelated, and something in my brain will pop and say, I read about this so many years ago, let's look into this stuff. And so I think, for one, medicine humbles you. You think you know the answers, and then all of a sudden it's something completely different. The human body humbles you a little bit. Again, we think we're smart as human beings and we know it all. And now with AI, we think we know it even more. But there is something outside of us way smarter than that humbles us. And I really feel that to me, the biggest thing I think that keeps me grounded is my gratitude just at being able to make a difference. There are a lot of other things I could have been, and just that life chose this path for me, however it ended up being. Just the fact that I have this incredible ability to touch these lives and make a difference. I think I don't take it lightly. I've been on the other side of the fence. I was a patient recently and a few years ago, and I know how scary it is. I know how you feel this lack of control, so to say, when you're not well, and how much a good physician can really help you just with their touch. And so I don't take that for granted. And it's that gratitude that I have, I think, that keeps me real and grounded. So I think that's where I go about. And knowing that, even though I know so much, there is this whole vast of unknowns that we're just discovering now. How amazing is that about the human body?
That's incredible. And I just I love the way you express that. I mean, I would imagine, it's interesting because through this entire conversation, the through line is your patient. It's making your patients feel better. Suddenly you're a physician and you become a patient. And it's got to be a very humbling experience. And so, like, without getting into the specifics, what was that journey like as a physician becoming a patient?
Yeah, it was very eye-opening, I'll be honest. Because for one, I do think that sometimes we're all so busy as physicians that we are honestly burnt out without realizing it. And so when I was in the ER, or when I was in the, admitted to the hospital bed, the nurse saying, well, I don't know actually who your physician is because they're too busy right now to come see you, was so eye-opening to me. Yes, they may have been busy. And the reality is, for me, I was the most important patient for that physician at that point in time, right? So I think, how do we sort of teach the future generation, teach ourselves to continue to show each patient how important they are and balance our time? And then, the other thing I think that was very eye-opening just was the medical language we use. We don't think about it a whole lot. And I was kind of laughing a little bit. I have a dear friend and my husband, he's not in medicine. So both of them were by my bedside pretty much the whole time. And sometimes the physicians would be explaining things to me and I got it because they were using all this medical jargon. And my husband would be like, wait, hold up. I don't understand a word of what you said. Can you just like dial that down and explain it to me again? And that was again very eye-opening that, I think sometimes we're so used to the medical language and well, this is what I think is going to happen. This is best case scenario. This is worst case scenario. But I think sometimes we need to pause and really look at who's in the room, how do they take it, and how do they actually absorb information. So that's something I've started incorporating into my practice, which is I now very deliberately will use language that is easy to understand for a sixth grader. And I don't overshare information. I'm kind of finding the right balance still, but between giving information, but not giving too much information because then there are so many ways that things can go down that rabbit hole. I found my husband Googling. I always tell him, don't do that. But he went to Dr. Google and was looking up things about my condition. And, everything on Dr. Google is you're going to die, essentially. And so I had to dial that back. And so I think it's a journey, and I'm again grateful that I got to be on the other side of the curtain, so to say, because I think it's helped me be a better physician.
Thank you for sharing that. And I would imagine, and I'm sorry that you had to go through whatever you went through, but I love the fact that you're looking at it with a glass half full. Because when we take these moments, these inflection moments in our life, and we realize there's a lesson or something we're getting out of them, it's such a great feeling. And I love the fact that your theme throughout as well has been about gratitude. Because like the world's grateful to have you practicing as a clinician because you can tell that you are so kind and thoughtful. And I would like to, I mean, I'm not a child anymore, but I would want you as my doctor. And I think it's interesting when you're on the other side and suddenly you're dealing with new doctors speaking, whatever the experience is like, it's a different world today. And I'm kind of curious just on that note, Rina, because you are in pediatrics, does that give you a little more wiggle room to be more, I don't want to say caring, but have a little more time with the patients and the families than traditionally you go into a physician's office now and you have the 5 to 8 minutes and you're left with, maybe a prescription, or you'll be lucky if you get a phone call with a diagnosis.
I think that's unfortunately the reality of medicine, and worse so for pediatricians. I think there was an article somewhere that said pediatricians essentially have become medicine skeleton crew, right? Less and less people are getting into pediatrics, a variety of reasons, which just means that the people who are currently in pediatrics are basically there's a shorter supply than demand. And so we are just all having to see a lot more patients. You only have so many hours in the day. There's so much work to be done. How do you prioritize that? And I kind of see pediatricians actually are a little bit tighter even than some of the adult medicine specialties, because now not only are they talking to you about, this is what you need to do to protect your child from whatever XYZ, they're also teaching you about your child's development. And they've got to do that in the span of that, whatever, 15-minute visit. And there's this whole amount of charting you have to do to make sure the insurance company is happy and like you don't get a big fat bill for it, etc. So I think there is a squeeze from both sides, and I don't know what's right. So when I grew up in India, where we trained, we would see, and I'm not exaggerating, in the morning, we called it an outpatient department or the morning clinic. It was a walk-in clinic. We would see on a slow day about 100, 120 patients a day. But there was no concept of patient privacy. It was essentially you were trained to diagnose as, within the first 2, 3 sentences, you had to figure out what was wrong and you had to learn how to multitask. And now there is this pivot, which is today in medicine, you do have the one-to-one time, but you only have 5 minutes. And how do you really make that patient feel valued in that 5 minutes? I don't know, have a good solution. I think, some of again, I'm not a techie person, but AI that's coming out has some cool features now that are helping physicians with having more face time and more contact with their patients. But I think it's in general for pediatricians, for internal medicine specialties alike, I think time is very, very limited. And I sense it. I sense it as, being a patient myself. But if there's a message I could give out to people is that, your doctor truly cares, and there's just so much else that they've got to get done. It's just not humanly possible. I'll tell you a fun study, Elizabeth, that was published that said, and I forget where, but it was published recently, that said if a pediatrician has to do everything that they're supposed to be doing in terms of, we're supposed to be giving mandated education, mandated whatever have you. If we did everything we had to do and saw a reasonable amount of patients a day, we'd need 27 hours in a day to get it done. And so this is, of course, knowing that it's a 24-hour day. Hopefully you need to sleep for some hours in the day. And so it's just, there is a balance, and I hope the next generation is going to help us find that balance a little bit better.
Well, I think, well, thank you for sharing. I think the next generation is already, yeah, they already think that way. If you look at the generation at whole, they're very conscious about a work-life balance. But I think, medicine is medicine. And I would imagine, I'm just kind of curious, so you've been practicing medicine for how many years? So you've watched the journey change. How has that made you feel, Rina?
Um, I think what I've realized is change is the only constant in life. And I remember the very first time electronic medical records. So I guess I'm dating myself, but I started off training, writing notes on my patients and writing stuff. And so when electronic medical records came out, I was like, oh my God, this is awful. And how am I ever going to do this? And what are they doing to medicine? And now when I look back, I was like, what was I doing with writing notes? It's so much easier to do electronic medical records. And so I think each change is for the better. That's the only constant. And I think that's the only way we all grow as human beings, as specialties. I have now come to the point, I was not always that way. I have now come to the point where I embrace change. I know that the first few, whatever it is, the first few days, months, whatever have you of change will be hard. But almost always, when I've looked back a year later, it's that you're in a better place than you're not. And if you're not in a better place, there's a way to tweak it and still make progress. So I think change is a necessary hurdle to progress. And so I enjoy change.
Well, thank you for that. And that's a really great way because it's going to change. It's, to your point, change is the one constant. So that's great that you think of it that way. Um, I'm curious, I have one last question, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to share aside from the question I have, like around your medical journey and your healthcare journey. I think if you want to share anything else, that would be wonderful.
I do want to share just a little bit about, the work I do on gender equity within healthcare. And so again, there are a lot of people who say, no, it doesn't exist. And I was one of them. My journey started years ago when somebody came to give a lecture, again, open mind. Somebody came to give a lecture at our institution and said, oh, there is gender compensation inequity in medicine. I was like, yeah, really? No way. Not in pediatrics. We're all so nice. And so I leaned over and I asked a colleague how much he made. And the answer shocked me because it was a good 50,000 more than I made. And that really opened my eyes, right? And so I think, honestly, I think there is a long way to go. The journey is not a destination I think I'm going to see in my lifetime for sure, because there's just so much to pack in. But it is a journey that you have to continue to take because, like I said, we owe it to the next generation. The way I've done it, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but the way I do it is I find objective data. What is the data out there? Let's put it out there. And then usually in a lot of my papers, I'll have suggestions on what can we do to make this better. And again, going back to, full circle on keeping an open mind. Sometimes I'm surprised because when I talk about it, or I have people who write to me or email me and say, actually, there's a better way. There's a different way. Maybe you could do this. So I'm a big believer in data. I'm a big believer in data transparency and just showing the evidence of what's out there, because I think together we're all smart. And I don't believe anybody is doing this purposefully. I don't think that, I think this is how it's always been kind of mentality. But if
Just,
you
yeah.
show people the data, most people are willing to do something about it. And so what I would tell people listening is whatever field you're in, it doesn't have to be medicine. Whatever field you're in, if you see something that doesn't seem right to you, find the data behind it and show objective evidence of the data, because you can never refute data. And that's the first step, I think, to change. And change is the first step towards making ourselves better, however you define better.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's it's just so interesting. I'm kind of curious in your time, because you said you've been at your health system or your hospital for what, 20 years now. Have you been able to have with your voice now in gender equity and addressing this, have they done right by you?
I think we're making progress. Again, there's a whole lot to do. We're certainly narrowing the gap on compensation equity. And I think more importantly, there is a strong desire to make things right. We've definitely seen more and more women in leadership now. There's definitely an open call for leadership opportunities. And again, like I said, in my lifetime, I've seen more women now entering into medical schools than men, which was not going to have happened in, at least in my imagination, how many ever years ago. So we're making progress. So yes, I do think so. And I think there is a willingness to listen, especially because you have data that is authentic, data that is driven by nothing other than I want to make the world a better place. I think if you come from that angle, it's very hard for people to refute you.
It's taking on a really important debate with grace, because
That's
you
right.
take the edge off of, you cut it, you cut that indignation, even though we have every right to be indignant. But when you take that off the table and just say, hey, these are the facts in such a way, and you do it with grace, you're likely to have more success. Wow. I just so admire you. So I have one last question. I mean, I could speak to you for hours. You're very melodious. But I'm curious, this is a platform for you tonight, for you today, to give women a message of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. What do you want to say to them, Rina?
I want to say to them, and this comes again from the feeling of gratitude, forgiveness, but somebody told me this years ago, which was sleep on it. And I can't tell you how profound it has been in my life. As you go through life, there will be, I can guarantee you, there will be times where you will feel like you were insulted, where you were belittled, where you were devalued, or where you just were unseen. And before you let that narrative grow bigger in your head, I say sleep on it and always look at the positive, because there's only one person whose opinion matters in your life. There's only one person whose value matters in your life, and that's you. As long as you haven't devalued yourself, everything else is asleep on it. Tomorrow morning, I'm still grateful for the opportunity to go and make a difference. Again, when I sleep on it, I find I wake up a lot more mellow. I'm not going to react with the anger that maybe they're wanting to evoke, or maybe that they didn't think would evoke, but anger never leads us to progress. I think it is forgiveness, and it is the ability to think calmly in a situation that will lead us. And so I think sleep on it, whatever it is, sleep on it and forgive. And that is going to really help you more than anybody else.
I love that. Yeah, don't react, sleep on it. That's just beautiful. This has been an incredible conversation. You are so inspiring, Dr. Rina Sanghavi. Thank you so much for getting under the hood with me today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Elizabeth. And I wish all our readers and listeners a wonderful, holiday season.
Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer. Her song, Rose.